Please.
Yeah, so I'm going to talk to you about planting systems. I'm going to start on some of the stuff around dormancy, and we're going to get into some pruning and training of trees. Okay, let's start with the dormancy. Right, so most of you know this, but our fruit production is really concentrated in areas that are higher in altitude. And one of our big problems is, this is 35 degrees south. If you were to look at the global map, you'd see that most apple production, by comparison to us, would be in the ocean. And we're a lot closer to the equator. Okay? What this means is it's generally a lot hotter. Okay, and there's a number of problems associated with that. So we try to go up the mountains. Our highest area is in Ceres and the Free State. Free State's unfortunately even closer to the equator. We've got the Langkloof and the Elgin areas down here. But you can see 300 meters up to 1,600 meters. Okay? In chilling terms, we measure chill units. We measure how much cold we get because the apple tree needs cold. I'm going to talk about that a lot. Okay? And we get anything from around 450 to about 1,000. Sometimes in Ceres we can go up to 1,500. Okay? The apple tree needs about 1,000 plus, 1,200 plus. Okay, I'm going to go into that in more detail. All right, what happens when we don't get enough cold? Then we get a problem that we call delayed foliation, but basically it just means that the buds on the tree are all confused in terms of when they should grow and when they shouldn't grow. And what happens is, obviously that flower was way ahead of these ones, and you can see that one in the back there, and things get protracted and mixed up, and this creates a whole bunch of problems. Okay. Right. So this is some of the first research on the subject. This is looking at what happens on a shoot. This is just a 1-year-old shoot. That's the tip of the shoot, and that's the base of the shoot. And they were looking at the amount of buds to burst over time. Okay? So it's an apple shoot. This is in a warm area in Stellenbosch. And you can see that we get some bud burst in the tip, and we get some bud burst in the base. And in the middle of the shoot, there's not much going on. Okay? So we end up with a poor and protracted bud burst, and a situation we refer to as Karl Necker. Okay? Bare shoots, bare wood formation. That's Corin referred to the buds that don't wake up, that stay dormant. And that's happening on the middle of the shoot. They sprayed DNOC, which is an old school rest breaking agent mixed in oil, and it improved the situation dramatically. I'm going to come back to this data again. All right. So, how do we measure the dormancy? How do we measure what's going on in those buds? Okay? Okay, so the buds, I'm going to repeat myself a number of times, but they taught me at university that repetition is good. Okay. Maybe it's just because I need it. Okay. So we take shoots, we go out to the field and we harvest them, we cut them off and we stick them in a growth chamber. Now this growth chamber runs with 24 hours of daylight at about 20 degrees. And it's hot and it's warm and it's humid. And we count how long it takes for those buds to grow when they're dormant. Okay, so we're measuring their ability to grow when they're meant to be asleep. Okay, and it's a bit of a rough system, but that's how we measure dormancy. Okay, so we try and wake them up by forcing them. We call these forcing chambers or forcing conditions. Okay. So each one of these dots was a sample taken from an orchard in either Elgin or in the higher parts of Ceres in the Bokveld. And what we did is we recorded the days until 20% of those shoots had burst, and we plotted it over the whole winter period, and we could see, if you look here, this is the colder area, this is the chill units. So we got about 1,500 in that year, and in Elgin, we only got about 800. So Ceres is a lot colder. But what's most noticeable is how the pattern of dormancy differs. So in Ceres, we started off non-dormant, and then something changed, and we were dormant. Okay? That happens in series naturally. In Elgin, we started off non-dormant, and it took us a long time to get dormant. Okay? And then we started coming out of dormancy. The opposite happened here. We think that this rapid increase in the colder areas, we've got a rough idea that it's related to frost and freezing temperatures. Okay. Okay, so it's the same data. I'm just showing it to you in a different way. And this is what's happening to the growth rate of the buds according to chilling. So this is the series area. We're getting cold and we're coming out of dormancy. Okay, and that's what the textbook told us was meant to happen. Okay, but in the warm areas, we're using up a whole chunk. Remember, we only got 800 in Elgin. We used up half to go dormant. Okay, so the climate and the temperatures and the weather are all affecting the trees differently, and the only normal areas are in the really cold areas. Normal in terms of what an apple tree would expect. Okay, so back in these days I was very involved in research, and we did a nice big trial. Okay, so these are all the areas that we cut shoots from, myself and Laura, and we cut the shoots and we had them couriered to the lab, and we forced them, and we did it from 2005 to 2009, so it's over 5 years, and we had areas that were 170 meters above sea level, that was in Stellenbosch, all the way to the Eastern Free State, almost at 2,000. So we got a lot of variation in climate. And this was, on each farm we collected Granny Smith and Royal Gala shoots. Okay. And we got a bunch of these responses. So again, this was a bunch of shoots that grew to 50% bud burst in about 16 days. And you can see that in the middle of winter, they took nearly 90 days. So they were properly dormant. But we got the same thing happening, well, not the same thing, but from the same variety, under the same forcing conditions, we got completely different reactions. So you can see that these shoots never actually went dormant. We didn't get this slowing and increase. And we found that this pattern varied from area to area. Okay? Being researchers, we put some maths in the equation. Okay? I've got a lot of help doing this. Okay? And we worked out that we could fit these two lines. Okay? So what we call this is, it's a two-line model where we represent the entrance into dormancy, and something happens and it turns and it goes out. Okay? So we're measuring the entrance and the exit. Okay. And this is the two varieties. That's the Royal Gala and that's the Granny Smith. And we did a bunch of fancy statistics. And what it showed us is that there were three main patterns. Okay? So there were the Royal Gala shoots that went into dormancy quite nicely and came out. Remember that nice graph I just showed you? And then there were the ones that did sort of like this whole protracted, delayed thing. Okay? And we essentially found the same pattern for Granny Smith. Okay, the maximum dormancy is a lot less, but it's essentially the same pattern. And when I say that, I'm looking more at how the buds come out of dormancy. So if you look at the galas in the warm areas, they were only bursting around Christmas. Okay, that's the longest day of the year. And the same thing for the grannies in the warm areas. Okay, so the varieties were affected by the climate fairly similarly. Okay. Right, so we tested this again, and we were able to summarize this, and we came up with these three patterns. We've got the good areas where the plants go dormant, turn around and come out, and look here, that's in February. It's before harvest. Okay, it's in summer. Okay, and they reach their maximum around the beginning of June, this time of the year. Okay, and then they come out at the end of August, early September, and then you've got bloom in September. That's a normal pattern. Okay, that is an apple tree growing in an environment that meets its requirements. Okay, our problem is these two groups. Okay, and I'm going to show you how significant that is just now. Okay, so if we don't do something in most of our apple areas to the trees, they're going to wake up at Christmas. okay, which means that you'll be ready for harvest somewhere, you know, at the end of the following winter or something crazy. Okay, it just doesn't work. All right. Okay, so just to sum up, there's big regional differences, and the differences between the varieties are not so big. Okay. What we know is that the climate affects the entrance and the exit separately. We know that it's affected by low temperatures, and we think that the entrance is affected by more freezing temperatures, but it's not clear-cut. Okay, even in the warmer areas, the buds still go dormant. All right, but we don't need to worry too much about that. Okay, we talk about global warming. We're talking about farming apples in South Africa, and tomorrow I'm going to talk about what the problems associated with this problem are. I'm not going to go into it in too much detail now. I'm going to jump straight to the solution. Okay. All right. So we talk about chemical rest breaking, and we spray stuff on the tree to wake the tree up in the areas where it's not cold enough. Okay. So these are chemicals that overcome this lack of chilling. Okay. They allow the plant to grow more normally. So we're manipulating it, but it gives us a nice response. Okay, so they normalize and they advance bud burst in spring. Okay, and I don't need to get too complicated, but they affect the metabolism of the plant. They lead to a cytokinin release. I'm going to talk a little bit about that. And what happens is that these cytokinins, it's a plant hormone, okay, that Karen spoke about reserves. These cytokinins get stored in the plant, and then they're released in spring. We don't exactly know how they're released, but they're released, and that's what gets the cells dividing, and that's what gets the plants growing. Okay? And we know that these rest-breaking agents trigger that. Okay? So essentially, it's the kickstart. Okay? On the motorbike. These days, you've got a starter, but when I was young, motorbikes had a kickstart. Okay? All right. And that's what they do. They get everything going. Okay, so back to our shoot. This is our shoot and our experiment. We've got this problem with poor bud burst in the middle of the shoot. The buds haven't had enough chilling, or the shoots haven't had enough chilling. Okay? And if we put the rest-breaking agent on, we get nice terminal bud burst, and we get all the buds in the middle of the shoot growing, and things are looking much better. Things are normalized. Okay. So I need to talk to you about training systems as well. So I needed to go into the overlap between dormancy and training systems. And I'm going to focus on this thing, acrotonic branching. Okay? That is a fancy word for what allows a tree to make a tree. So in the first year, the shoot grew to there, and in the second year, it grew to there. Okay? And acrotonic branching means that that terminal bud gives you a nice strong shoot. Okay? And if you don't have the terminal bud being dominant and giving you a strong shoot, then it's difficult. It's all right down there. Everyone can hear me. Okay. I don't know what that thing does, but anyway. Okay, so we need this dominance from this bud, and we need it to give us a strong shoot. Okay, and we train trees in spindles or central leaders. I'm not going to go into all these fancy names of these things. That's endless. Okay, but this dominance of this terminal bud is really important to us. Okay, and what happens when it's not cold enough, this poor bud is a bit confused. It hasn't been chilled enough, and it doesn't know how to grow properly. Okay. All right. So we also know that we can alleviate this problem with the rest-breaking agents. Okay? And I'm not going to go into this in too much detail, but just bear with me. There's the terminal bud, and there's the lateral bud. Okay? And what we need is this terminal bud to become dominant. Okay? To be able to give you a strong trunk. Now, I did a bunch of research on dormancy with the forcing room, with shoots, and we looked at what happened at this bud, and we looked at what happened at this bud. And when I forced the shoots in Belgium, at the end of winter, those buds were able to burst in 3 days. Okay? It's very fast. Whereas if I took a warm area in South Africa, it took 30 days, 10 times longer. Okay? And that is just because these buds from this area didn't get enough chilling. I mean, obviously there's a deeper physiological explanation for this, but the long and the short is they weren't kept cold enough. Okay? The area was too warm for the apple tree. All right. We went to the cold areas and it was a bit better, about 13 days, but it's nowhere near what it did. Believe me, it was my first proper winter in Belgium, and I was cutting shoots outside, and we've got Walter here, he knows about proper cold. We don't have a proper cold in this country. Okay. It gets much colder in Europe. All right. Now what I want to show you is for this bud to become dominant, it must be able to grow faster than this bud. Okay? It's very simple. It must grow faster. Okay. So if I take the warm part of South Africa, remember that bud takes 30 days to grow. The lateral bud is growing in 15 days. Okay? So it's twice as able to grow than the terminal bud. And I'm not going to get into all the complicated stuff behind this, but just remember that this lateral bud is more ready to grow than the terminal bud. Okay? And if you go to a warmer area, then a colder area, in South Africa, then we can see only in the colder areas is that terminal bud now able to grow faster than this lateral bud. Okay? And in a proper cold area, it's considerably faster at the end of winter. So we need this winter and the chilling in winter to allow the terminal bud to become dominant. Okay? To give us, we all think of a central leader tree. Is an apple tree. A modern orchard system's got a dominant trunk. Well, guess what? In most of South Africa, we can't easily produce a dominant trunk. Okay, it's a bit of a challenge. Okay, to get into the rest breaking, I'm going to talk more about this stuff again tomorrow. Okay, this talk today links into tomorrow's talk, so I hope you're going to be there. Right, this is zeaxanthin riboside. That's a cytokinin. Okay, that's inside the plant. That's the hormone that triggers cell division, gets things going. Actually kickstarts metabolism at the cells and gets the mitochondria functioning, and it's like a hell of a strong cup of coffee to a cell. All right? Okay, so we measured it. And these were the shoots that didn't receive any, these were in Stellenbosch, which is not the ideal place to grow apple trees. But you can see the shoots eventually woke up sort of November. Okay? And you can see just before the shoots woke up, the cytokinins were higher. Okay, but to have bud burst and flowering in December it's not tenable. Okay, you can't farm like that. All right. So we treated them with Dormex, which is a different kind of rest-breaking agent, and DNC oil, which was a brilliant rest-breaking agent, except for all the bad stuff it did to everybody and everything in the environment. And yeah, we won't go there, but it's gone. Okay. And what happened is, you can see that when you sprayed it, you got the cytokinins earlier and you got bud burst earlier. So these things work quite neatly. They really work well on plants. Okay. So, yeah, what have we got? These days, we've still got Dormex, hydrogen cyanamide. We've got TDZ. This is a synthetic cytokinin. We've got oil. Oil works well. And then we've got the nitrogen-bearing compounds. Okay. If you've got an orchard and you need to know what to spray, then you probably need to be specific about the variety. Okay, so I'm not going to get into too much of the details of how you spray the stuff. I'll show you a slide just now. But there's one bit of data that I do want to show you, okay, because this is important for apples. We're going to talk about training systems just now. So we did a big experiment where we had different concentrations of oil and different concentrations of Dormex. Okay, and we looked at what happened to bud burst. Okay, so just look at this column here, the growing buds. There wasn't a big difference with the oil, but there was a very big difference with the Dormex. Okay, so the Dormex doubled the number of buds growing on the shoot. And that's important, okay, because on the shoot, those buds become the spurs. Okay, and those spurs make the flowers, and those spurs which make the flowers make the fruit a year or two later. Okay, and I'm going to jump to that one. This was the yield the next year. Don't worry about this. The yield the year thereafter. Remember I said, just look at this one, kilograms per tree. 2 years before this, we put Dormex on there, and we almost doubled the yield. Okay? So you need these rest-breaking agents, not only to make the trunk grow properly, but also to give you the spurs that give you fruit. Okay. All right. Let's talk about the timing of when you spray rest-breaking agents. Okay. Mike, most of you who've been around a while will know Mike North has done a lot of work on this. He sprayed these different rest-breaking agents from August all the way through to September. And you can see there's not a big increase in the effect. Okay? There's a difference between the control versus the two treatments. There's a difference, but there's not a huge time effect. Okay? It tends to work better when you spray a bit later. In practical terms, we're actually more worried about the weather when you spray than the actual date. Okay. All right, that's the same experiment done again a year later and the same effect. Okay. If you're farming in the Free State or you're farming in Stellenbosch, you're going to have to spray some of these different products. And if you're not familiar with it, get hold of a local chemical guy and work out a good recipe. Okay? I don't want to spend too much time on the rates. But there's a big difference, okay, in how you can spray these things. All right. There's a few general things. Normally we spray them to runoff. Okay, these days if we're using clean Dormex, pure Dormex and water on apples, we don't spray to runoff anymore because it burns. Okay? We usually spray at a minimum of 70% tree row volume. So it's a full cover spray. You're trying to wet all the buds on the tree with a lot of water, and you need the right droplet size. Okay, that's the practical stuff. Okay, the important things to think about. Remember that some varieties are very sensitive and they can burn. Is Jannie Wichmann here? He still hasn't forgiven us for burning his trees. Okay. You must remember that the flowering pattern affects your chemical thinning strategy. Okay, so you don't just spray one thing without having an impact on the other things you spray. Remember the pollinators, remember the effects on russet. Just look at what you know about the block and look at the weather. Okay, the weather and the weather that we're having. Look at this glorious weather we're having now. This is not good for rest breaking. Okay, it's not good for dormancy. Okay, let me get into the training systems. Okay, training systems is a terribly broad subject, and the first written stuff about training systems is written by the Romans, and I'm sure there's a lot older stuff than that, because the Romans sort of like went around and took everything from all over the world and brought it back to Rome. Okay, so I'm not going to get into every single possibility. I'm going to rather try and cover. How are we doing for time? Okay, I'm going to try and rather cover the general approach that we've got with apples and pears and plums. Okay, and rather talk about the different fruit varieties. Okay, so I don't know about what's that now, 15, 20 years ago, we had a central leader tree with a proper base on it and a number of branches on it. Okay? And we pruned these branches, but they tended to grow and get longer and longer and longer, and then we had to cut them out because they were too long. Okay, so we moved over to a system called the Solax, and I'm going to go into the Solax. And this is generally what we're doing these days. We are moving more and more towards spindles and some other ideas, but I'm going to focus on the Solax. Okay, so Michael showed you this. There's an important relationship between the amount of light you intercept and the yield. Okay, so the way to read this is there's no ways you're going to get a good yield if you're not capturing lots of light. Okay, so you need to fill the space in the orchard. All right, but this relationship can turn negative on you, especially up at the top end. Okay, and that's because the shading within the tree becomes a problem. Okay, so we're under a race. We're under a race. You plant the tree, you're under a race to fill the canopy as quickly as you can, And then you've got the handbrake up trying to keep the light in there. Okay, and that's the way it goes. All right. What we're trying to do is we're trying to sell as many apples or plums or pears as you can cumulatively. Let's say orchard lasts 20 years. Okay? And it doesn't help you, burn the candle at both ends and you come in nice and early with a yield, but you only pan out at 60 tons to the hectare. Okay? This orchard, over a 20-year period, gave about 1,100 tons. Okay? If you rather get your tree structure right, even if it costs you a bit of production, and you eventually get the orchard up to 100 tons, which is what we tend to consider as a target for most of our new plantings. I don't know if we always get there, but that's what we're aiming for. Okay, so if you get there by year 10, you've got another 10 years, you're at 1,200, which beats the early production orchard. The trick is to get to 100 tons as quickly as you can. Okay, that's the middle option. And you can see it's significant. Okay. All right. So this is a really nice orchard on Graymead. This is a Solax. It's spaced 4.5 by 1.5 or 4 by 1.5. This is what we've been doing for the last 10 years, mostly. Okay? But there's a few characteristics about this orchard that need to be pointed out. Is we've got branches all the way up the trunk, right the way up to the top. Okay? We've got a full canopy. Okay? It's dominant trunk all the way to the top. It didn't stop halfway. Okay, we filled that canopy. If you look down the row, it's not closed. Okay? The light's still getting in there. Okay, so this is a full canopy with well-managed light. And I've got a few more pictures. There's another one. Okay, we can see some heavy branches developing at the top here. Those are going to give us something to work on going forward, but it's generally open and full and tall. Okay, this is the kind of orchard that we get tons out of. There's another one. Okay, slightly older one. You can see it didn't have a trellis system. The trees are starting to fall over. If you've got 120 tons of apples hanging on an orchard and it's not supported and you get a strong wind and some rain, it can fall over. It's as simple as that. But you can see that bearing volume. Okay, so that's generally what we're talking about when we're talking about the Solax. It's a dominant central axis with fruiting branches, and the branches are bent down and they're fruitful. Okay, so that's what I'm going to focus on. All right, so how do we maximize light? Michael started. I'm going to just carry on where he left off. Plant quality trees, get good growth, fill the bearing volume, tree height. Right. Okay, so that's a reasonably good tree. If you can plant a tree of anything of 1.6, 1.8 meters and up, you're doing well. Okay, this last year, the nurseries have had serious challenges with droughts and water, and I don't think all our trees are going to be looking like that. But if you can plant that most years, you're doing well. Okay, the important thing about a nursery tree, it's almost more important than the height, is how much root volume you've got. Now obviously this is a bit of an extreme tree, okay? But you want a solid root system. And when you plant that tree, you want to look after as much of those roots as possible. Don't cut them off to fit them in a hole. Okay, I see that all the time. Yeah, cut them all off so they fit into a small hole. It's much more beneficial to dig a big hole, okay, and bury all of those roots properly. Don't just stick the tree in the hole with all the roots sticking up in the air. That also doesn't work. Okay, I've seen that too. There's lots of different theories on planting trees. We won't get into that debate. Okay, so we're back to our acrotonic thing again. Eh? So that you planted the tree. That was what you bought from the nursery, that piece. This is what you did yourself in the orchard. Okay. Now this is a Jonagold branch in Belgium. Okay, and that's why I always keep this photographed, because that's what the tree will do in the right environment. But how do we get it close to this? Okay, it's difficult in the warmer areas. It's really difficult. The tree hasn't had enough chilling. Okay, we put the trees in the cold room. I'm going to go into that. And you can use rest-breaking agents, but they don't give you that nice dominance that chilling does. Okay, so I've showed you this before. I'm showing you again. We want this terminal bud to move. Okay, we want to get it going. Right. So you've got an opportunity. The tree's not stuck in the ground yet. You can put it in the cold room. Okay, and 2 months of cold storage at about 3-4 degrees will do that. Okay, it'll completely satisfy the chilling. So this is what we got in Ceres that year. That's what we got in Elgin that year. And this is what happened in the cold room. So at 3 to 4 degrees in the cold room, every hour is an effective chill unit. 6 to 8 weeks in a cold room will completely satisfy the chilling requirement of the apple. Okay. All right. So if you plant the tree out of the cold room, you get bud burst from the top to the bottom. Now remember, I've showed you that the buds are not synchronized. These buds are now synchronized. They're synchronized by cold. Okay, so bud burst is even, top to bottom. Okay? And what that does is it produces a tree which is apically dominant. Okay, that leader grows, and then the side branches are nice and even as well. Okay? This is a tree that wasn't in the cold room. You can see that one was dominant and that one was weak. It's desynchronized. This is typically what happens in the warmer areas without the cold room. Look at that leader growth. The tree's grown in its base more. Okay? Basal dominancy. Okay? Basal dominance. Okay? And that's, the warmer the winter, the more of that you will get. All right. Okay. So you put the tree in the cold room. Okay, and then we've still got some problem varieties. Grannies, Fuji's, Braeburn, Kanzi. Okay, pinks to some extent, Rinders Golden, you name it. Okay, these varieties are naturally inclined, even with a lot of chilling, to be basal dominant. Okay, if you look at these were grannies. So they were put in the cold room. The bud burst wasn't great. It was all near the top, and they were all equally strong. Okay, it's an architectural trait. That's the soos hy gemaak is, né? All right. What we do is we just go through at the end of the first summer and we take off all these strong branches. Okay, and that leaves you with a dominant trunk. And if you've done well in the first year, you will have been able to produce almost all the height you need out of that orchard. Okay? And now the next year, we're going to have to start again with our side branches, but they'll be weaker because they're a year later. Okay? This pruning is not the best thing for yield, but it's a good thing for getting the structure and the hierarchy in the tree right, and it works. Okay. All right. So you can see this is a Braeburn tree in a warm area. Look at that leader growth. Okay? It's genetically weak, and in a windy area, it's even more of a problem. Okay, I'm going to talk about trellis systems at the end. I've only got one slide to show you about trellis systems. But if you can keep that leader tied up, you can see there's a string there. It's not very clear. But if you keep it tied up, you'll get it longer. Okay? You'll get more height. All right. There's just another one. What we say is you must take out, you see these thick ones? We look at the ratio of them. We talk about the 1-to-2 rule. It means a side branch must always be thinner than half of the trunk at the position that it's next to the trunk. Okay, in the warm areas, we also head. Remember I showed you that lateral bud is more able to grow than the terminal bud. So we just take off a cigarette length and you're on a lateral bud that can grow faster. Okay, that's after pruning. Looks bad. That's a year later. Okay, that's a Fuji. We're above the top wire, 3.2 meters. Now we can start bending aggressively. Okay. In some of the areas, like the Free State, it's all virgin soil, it's under net. We can actually get stronger leaders. Remember, the Free State is in that area with the better chilling. Okay? And you can start put fruit on a tree like this. If we put fruit on a tree, in a warm area that hasn't been chilled enough, then that leader completely stops. Okay. It's just a nice tree at the end of 2-3 years. It is in the Free State, but you've got your trunk and you've got all your scaffolds, you've got the whole structure there to carry that tree through 20 years of bearing. And you've done it in 2 years. And you know, if you can do it by 3 years, that's also okay. All right, so in terms of the Solax, we worry about keeping this leader dominant, and we worry about light. So there's a bunch of things that are on the go. We take out the thick branches, and we bend the weaker ones. Okay? All right. So, yeah, I'm going to talk about bending a little bit. But that branch has been bent, and there's a bunch of unique things that happen when you bend branches. Okay. So, you need to wait. If you've planted 1.5 meters, you need quite a substantial side branch. You need to wait till it's long enough. Don't bend it when it's 30 centimeters long. It's not going to produce a branch of 1.2 meters. Okay? We tend to bend mostly in the second year, and we tend to bend just below the horizontal. Okay? And what happens when you bend, you see that some of these spurs become stronger than the other ones. Okay? And if you look at the flower buds, those flower buds are fat, and the ones pointing down are skinny. Okay, so you're actually changing the allocation pattern of the tree through bending. And these big buds will give you bigger apples and a strong burr shoot, which will allow you to produce fruit the year after. Okay, so this is a branch that's been done for a few years, and you can see that all of these tips have got a flower bud. Okay, so we're developing that terminal fruiting habit, which is beneficial, especially in a warm area. Okay, all right. How are we doing for time? 7 minutes. Ooh, okay. I was worried about this. Okay, pears. We can put them in the cold room for 4 weeks. Personally, I've gone away from heading pears at planting. I'm happy with the results. I'm going to talk about how we do that. Okay. One of the things about pears is transplant shock out of the nursery. Okay. We're mostly on BP rootstocks, which don't give you many roots, and when the tree gets transplanted, it gets a big shock. Okay. So you need to be especially careful with pears, with nutrition and irrigation in the first year, especially. Okay. All right, so that's a second leaf packhams. We planted the whip, it grew out in the first year, and it spurred up, and there's a lot of material there to work with. Okay? There's all the material. Now, one of the tricks, okay, there's a few tricks, but one of them is rest-breaking agents. Okay, you need a bit of Dormex. It helps to give you the numbers of branches. Okay? Another thing is this shoot is not long enough, so you need to leave it upright until it is long enough before you bend it. Okay? We tend to take out only the really thick side branches, the really thick ones. I'm talking almost a 1-to-1 ratio. Okay. And then when the branch is long enough, we bend it. So you just wait till the branch is long enough before you bend it. And we don't bend it below horizontal, we bend it about 60 degrees. Okay? There's quite a few fruiting habit differences between apples and pears. Okay. All right. In the warm areas, we still tip the leaders. Okay. All right. The plums. Again, that's a stone fruit. But again, we're on our dominant central axis. Okay. It's essentially the same structure. It's a trunk with some fruiting branches. Okay. The reason that we've got all the fruiting branches flat on the wire is not really for anything other than if they were loose, the fruit would all get scuffed and wind rubbed. So we tie them to the trellis to look after their quality so that they don't get full of rub marks. Okay, and that's almost the main reason. Okay. You can do plums in a V system. And again, this side of the V is a dominant trunk with fruiting branches. It's the same concept. If it had the same root system, you'd have a tree with 2 trunks and two dominant trunks and fruiting branches. Okay, it's the same essential architecture. Okay, so this was a really nice planting. These trees were huge. They reached the top wire, and we got brilliant bud burst on them. Okay, and in plums, we don't have to go in the cold room. You can actually get this good bud burst with a bit of Dormex. 1% Dormex will give you strong bud burst on plums. Okay, and at the end of the year, you definitely want to see that dominant trunk. Okay? We do take out the thick stuff. Okay, so we don't head the tree at planting. We use Dormex. We pay attention to the thickness of the shoots. It must be half the thickness of the trunk. And we use a lot of bending rather than pruning. Okay? When you head plum trees, you get a lot of equally strong shoots. Okay, so if you're trying to create a vase tree, now the only place I would do a vase in South Africa are the areas where you don't have any wind. Okay, we need that wire support system to prevent rub marks. So that's the main motivation for the trellis in plums. Okay, but this is good to create a vase. It's not good for a central leader. Plant the nursery whip. Put Dormex on it. You'll get bud burst from top to bottom. Few weeks later, it'll look like this. Now you can see the plum trees are vigorous, and these shoots are growing strong. And each shoot wants to make another trunk, so we need to manipulate them. Okay, and we tried a few things. We tried to cut them out middle of November, and they regrew. Some of them were nice and thick, some of them weren't so good. The problem when you do summer pruning on plums is the response. The shoot that comes out seldom gives you flower buds that will set. Okay, so we went over to bending. Okay, and bending is time consuming, but again, gives you the best response. Okay. Pay strong attention to the ratios. You can see that side branch is too thick, and that's why it's pushing all these water shoots. Because it's too thick, it's going to be vegetative. Okay? Cut out the thick ones in winter. Just cut them out. All right? And there you can see the nice weak response. Okay? And that's a shoot that we can utilize and convert from vegetative to fruiting. All right. This is the last slide. I think I've done it. Okay. Why trellises? And again, I'm not going to talk about how to construct a trellis. I'm going to give you a strong physiological reason for investing in a trellis, which from my perspective is the most important. If you compare trellised with untrellised, okay, there's 100%. Okay? These trellis trees' trunks were thinner. After 3 years, they were 84% in terms of the increase of the controls. Okay, so because that tree is tied up to the wire, it doesn't need to invest energy in wood. Okay, and if it's not investing energy in wood, then the one thing it's probably definitely doing is giving you a stronger root system. Okay, but it'll also give you all the bits and pieces you need to produce fruit. Okay, and these guys measured it. They measured the yield efficiency. And after 3 years, the trellis trees were 76% more efficient. And we're in the business of selling fruit, and if 76% more efficiency doesn't tickle you, then don't put in a trellis. Okay, I think this talks for itself. Okay, all right, and that's it.